And so to talk a lot more about what we're expecting to see, especially as the two leaders are trying to reach a peace agreement, let's bring into the conversation now political analyst Brian Sobel. Brian, thanks so much for being with us here on Live Now from Fox.
Christina, good to see you.
Good to see you as well. And so it's closing out the year 2025 with a major meeting between Zelenskyy and President Trump. We do know that the two leaders have met several different times, of course, sometimes inflammatory meetings, other times very productive meetings. But heading in tomorrow, what are you really looking for as President Trump invites Zelenskyy down to Mar-a-Lago?
As you point out, they've met many, many times, so it isn't as though two strangers are coming together. I think they're trying to work out the final points of a plan, a peace plan, if you will, to present to Putin in Russia to see whether that will move him at all towards peace. It'll be interesting to see.
And so I'm going to put up some video that we do have of the two leaders. You did point out, again, they've met several different times. But what's interesting about this is that Zelenskyy has since said that he and President Trump's plan was 90% agreed to, but did not say whether or not they would physically sign any agreements after this meeting. What do you think are some of the biggest portions that are holding Zelenskyy up as the two leaders are now trying to find a way, like you said, to present something to Putin to have this war overseas end?
The president has been pushing Zelenskyy to be willing to give up land and to give up, obviously, a NATO presence. He has pushed him in a number of ways, knowing that by doing so, he may curry favor with Vladimir Putin. I think whatever they come up with is going to fall short of what Vladimir Putin wants, which is all of Ukraine. This game of meeting with Zelenskyy, meeting with European allies, trying to come together on something that will be palatable to Putin may be a fool's errand, as it were, because Vladimir Putin does not appear to want to move even a little bit towards peace here.
I'm glad you mentioned the other meetings with leaders as well. We even saw just today, I'm going to put up some video on the screen. This was the meeting that happened just about 15 or so minutes ago, where Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney did have a meeting and conversation with Volodymyr Zelenskyy ahead of his trip down to the United States. How important is it that other leaders from other larger nations are also having these conversations when it comes to the peace plan that comes between Ukraine and Russia that folks are hopeful for?
Christina, it's huge because if Europe maintains a one philosophy, a one position philosophy, that puts actually a lot of pressure on Donald Trump to continue to find an accommodation for Zelenskyy in all of this. We have to remember the origin of this is that the Russians invaded Ukraine. And I think from the perspective of Ukraine, they are negotiating from a position of weakness, obviously, but also from the standpoint that we're giving away something where the Russians aren't giving away anything. They've already invaded, they've already taken land, and now we're supposed to give up more land and more power over our own destiny in favor of peace. So in a sense, to use the old phrase, from a Ukraine standpoint, they're negotiating against themselves. Meanwhile, Putin says nothing. He just waits around for the Americans to call him and say, hey, here's what we have agreed with Zelenskyy about. But again, the importance of Europe, of these other countries saying, hey, we see Russia for what it is, reminds Donald Trump that if he wants to have relations with Europe, and we have to have those, with other countries around the world, Canada, our neighbor to the north, if we want to have good relations with other countries, we have to see their position, particularly in Europe, which is so tenuous from the perspective of their proximity to Russia.
I appreciate the way that you broke that down. It really gives us a full view of everything that is at stake here. And I do want to put this up on the screen. This is from the Prime Minister of Canada's account on social media, saying Prime Minister Carney spoke with President Zelenskyy to discuss the latest developments in the ongoing peace talks. He affirmed Canada's commitment to Ukraine, throughout these negotiations and emphasized the need to maintain pressure on Russia to negotiate. And speaking about some of those conversations that are happening behind the scenes, I want to put this live picture up of the White House. But Brian, ultimately, we do know that these planned talks between the two presidents in Florida are coming after Trump advisors Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner and other top negotiators from Russia and Ukraine have had a series of meetings over the last 2 months. I want to ask you, how important is it that these other conversations are still happening, not just between the two leaders like President Trump and Zelenskyy, but of course those negotiators like Kushner, like Witkoff, having conversations behind the scenes?
Well, the way it works very clearly, and it has for many, many years, is that principals from each country meet, whether those are foreign ministers or envoys or whatever, and they meet and they essentially work out most of the details, the vast majority of the details. Those are then brought to the principal negotiators, in this case, Putin and Trump, and then in theory, those two would close the deal. But what we're hearing from a lot of these negotiations is that the Russians aren't moving very far on things. And if that's the case, then all of these peace negotiations really are doing nothing more than kicking the can down the road for Putin's opportunity to continue to try to win the war in Ukraine, which has not gone well and which he is not winning. But you know, the Russian people and Russia in general have a long history of staying with a war despite the losses and the effect on Russian society. So as we watch how this materializes, we will see whether Vladimir Putin finds out or figures out, is a better way to put it, that their peace is preferable because of the economic squeeze on Russia, because of what's going on, particularly on the battlefield, where they're not making great advances and they're losing many, many people. And all of these factors, including where the Russian people think this is going, are all impacting Putin, including oil supplies around the world. It goes on and on. But he at a certain point, when he decides that he can no longer make progress in Ukraine, will, I'm sure, decide that he's going to declare victory and go home.
And I have to ask you, Brian, one of the other major sticking points has been Russia's speaking out against Ukraine joining the European Union. And there's been some movement on that in those conversations. Why is that such a huge sticking point for Russia? And why would Ukraine want to be part of the European Union on a larger scale?
Well, they should be part of the European Union. The question where it started originally was Ukraine's interest in being part of NATO, which is, of course, a protection for Ukraine. But even the European Union is a protection for Ukraine, economically and otherwise, because it solidifies Ukraine's relationship with Europe. That worries Vladimir Putin and the Russians. And what they want to do, and this is a big piece of this, is they want to continue to isolate Ukraine. This is clearly part of all of what's going on here. They want to isolate Ukraine to the extent that if anything happens further of another invasion, subsequent to the two that they've already done, then will Europe come to the defense of Ukraine? And of course, Zelenskyy is saying, hey, the more I'm involved with the European Union and maybe someday way down the road NATO, that's a protection for my people, for the Ukrainian people and for the Ukrainian nation.
And so we have this tweet there from Volodymyr Zelenskyy saying at the bottom, we plan to keep developing U.S.-Ukraine reconstruction investment funds. They're talking about some of the economic factors here as well. Brian, before I let you go, I just want to ask you about overall President Trump's legacy and what he's been pushing for as far as bringing some of these international conflicts to an end. He seemed to have made this a huge part of this second term. How much more do you think the president is going to be able to do in these last few days of 2025 to try to get something over the hump here?
I don't think anything happens with Ukraine and with Vladimir Putin for a while yet. So to me, it's not a 25 issue. It may not even be a 26 issue. The legacy of Donald Trump and we've heard him talk about it, he wants to be known as a peace president, somebody who has solved wars around the world. And so far, he's done a remarkable job of solving problems around the world. The problem with Russia and Ukraine is it's more complex than almost any area of the world, save for the Middle East. And so this one is going to take every ounce of Donald Trump's energy, acumen, and all of the people around him. And also understanding that you can't leave Ukraine in a position where a year from now, Russia resumes its offensive. But what has to happen is that Ukraine has a future of peace for a long time to come, for forever, one would hope. That's the challenge for Donald Trump, is to try to find that kind of solution in Ukraine. And to date, Vladimir Putin does not have the same vision for Ukraine that Donald Trump or Americans do or Europeans do, which is a place of peace.
And I think that was well said there. Before I let you go, Brian, you also know that there's yet another meeting that's going to be happening on Monday. President Trump, of course, has already said that he plans to make several big announcements on Gaza in early January. But the next steps are going to actually be happening on Monday after a meeting at Mar-a-Lago once again with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. How important is this next meeting between those two leaders?
They're all important, and the meeting with Bibi Netanyahu is like Zelenskyy, these constant check-ins to make sure that these nations are seeing eye to eye with the President of the United States. And so Monday is yet again an important meeting for Netanyahu, for Israel, and for the Middle East, and we'll see what emerges from it.
All right. That's certainly something that we'll keep our eyes on, and we certainly appreciate, as always, Brian Sobel for being with us here on Live Now from Fox ahead of tomorrow's meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy traveling down to Mar-a-Lago. Thanks so much, Brian.
You're very welcome. Have a great day, and we'll talk soon.